Hey everyone! So over the last couple of weeks I invited people to send me any questions they had about medieval literature or my relationship with it. Most of them were via Tumblr and I've collected them all and I'm going to attempt to answer as many as I can in the space of about 5 minutes, but some of them are kind of in depth, so we'll see how we go. Do you think medieval Irish literature is easily adaptable? E.g., I very much enjoy audio dramas and podcasts. Do you think that that would be the right platform to adapt it to? Well, if I didn't think it could be adapted, I wouldn't do this because I am literally adapting it for camera. There are already podcasts that talk about medieval literature. There's one I listened to a bit last year called Medieval Death Trip, which I quite enjoyed. I'm not really a podcast person, I just don't take anything in. I don't think there's that many like super academic ones, but there are definitely podcasts, so I would say the answer to that is a hard yes. If you could go back in time and ask a filly a single question about early Irish literature, what would it be? For the sake of this question, let's say this is the 6th century and all language issues are ignored. I would ask them if they have Cuchulainn and what they have about Cuchulainn, because there's a few theories that he's like quite a late addition to the Ulster cycle because there's quite a few texts he's not in, so I would want to know like how early that is. I would basically just ask them for their Cuchulainn opinions, which is what I just ask anybody when I meet them anyway. What are some ways you see medieval Irish literature is still speaking to themes people respond to today? Well, medieval Irish literature is very caught up in ideas of leadership, what makes a good leader, what the relationship between a king and his people is. There's a lot of texts where a bad judgment given by a king causes the whole country to go to chaos and ruin and fire, and I feel like that's relevant. Given that I'm literally right now painting a protest sign for the People's Vote March tomorrow, I would say it's focus on leadership and the symbiotic relationship between the people and their rulers is something that is still relevant, even if we have a very different approach to it than they did in medieval Irish lit. I kinda gathered that decapitations in Old Irish lit aren't too uncommon, but what is the weirdest thing you encountered in a story? There is a lot of weird stuff in medieval Irish lit. It is true people get decapitated a lot, and it is also true that their decapitated heads like to continue talking after they're dead. I think the weirdest death is probably a toss-up between either Medivh, who gets hit by a hard piece of cheese and dies, or Conall, who has a brain embedded in his head for like up to 7 years before he actually dies, and when he dies it's because someone tells him about Jesus getting crucified and he's so upset about it that the brain falls out. So those are both pretty weird deaths. And there is other weird stuff that isn't about death, but we started with decapitation, so let's just continue on a morbid theme. Do you have opinions on Welsh lit? I do have opinions on Welsh lit. My opinion on Welsh lit is that someone should make a film adaptation of Gododdin, and every time they mention the van of battle, it should be an actual white van. That is my opinion on Welsh lit. What elements you find can be seen in both Welsh and Irish medieval lit? Yeah, so there are quite a few parallels, probably not as many as the Victorians thought there were, but there are quite a few. There's quite a lot of animal transformations in both. I think the 4th branch of the Mabinogi has a lot in common with texts like Tochbach Aidan. Like, I noticed while rereading them that I'm like, oh, that comes up twice. I think the weirdest thing that I remember coming across in both that's very specific is the idea of otherworld dogs as being white with red ears. It's just such a specific detail that you feel like there's a story there. And maybe the story is just a Welsh person read an Irish story and borrowed it, or vice versa, but maybe the story is someone actually encountered otherworld dogs and that's what they look like. What is your favourite magical weapon that isn't the Gaebolga from Irish saga literature? Fergus MacRoy has a sword that gets up to all sorts of weird stuff and supposedly can be as big as a rainbow, which I just love as a description of all the things to compare a sword to. They compare it to a rainbow. It's also capable of like chopping the tops of mountains. It's a very weird sword. It's basically a giant lightsaber. So I would say that is probably my favourite, but I don't have a lot of opinions on weapons in general. I also like that in some texts a warrior will be mentioned as having a like famous magical weapon on loan. Like there's a weapons library that they just lend them out to different warriors. Why is Conall Cernach so great? I know this is you, Emmett. My friend Emmett is doing a master's on Conall Cernach and has a lot of opinions on him. So I know this anonymous question was submitted by him. Conall is a character I don't know a huge amount about, personally. I think what's interesting about him is actually how marginal he is in a lot of texts. He just kind of wanders through in the background and is getting up to stuff, and he's often in Scotland for some reason. Like, big stuff's going down and they're like, where's Conall? Oh, Scotland. I think there's a lot about him that is interesting because it remains unsaid, and he's one of those characters where extremely weird things like the fact that his horse has a dog's head and eats people or something is just mentioned as if that's totally normal. But then again, Cuchulainn apparently got one of his horses out of a lake. Horses in medieval Irish lit are generally just weird. What is it about Irish literature that keeps you coming back? Because there is always something weirder around the corner. You have read a text like 100 times and you come back to it and you discover something else that you didn't notice about it, and then it's even weirder than the rest. Or like you think a text is a little bit odd in isolation and then you read it in relation to other texts and you realise that none of it makes any sense. I think the thing I like about it is just how completely and unrelentingly weird it all is, and how they often present very weird things as if they are perfectly normal. So rather than going in for big mythological creatures that are supposed to be dramatic, they'll just be like, oh yeah, there's some venomous sheep around here. Oh yeah, this cat made of fire just jumped through this guy's chest and now he's dead. They just present it like that is a regular thing. There's a lot that's really funny as well as that's really weird, so they'll just understate things in the funniest way. Cuchulainn will threaten to kill someone in a very grotesquely violent way, and the person in question will just go, wow, he's hard to talk to, isn't he? I think the humour and the weirdness sometimes gets lost, and you just keep going back to it and you find something else that's weird. Do you agree or disagree with the assessment by Cogath Gaethel Regalov that it would take 7 Conall Cernachs to take down 1 Luke and 7 Lukes to take down Hector, son of Priam? The Cogath is a text about Brian Boru, written at the instigation of Merchatach Brian, I think my Gaelic history is failing me. I disagree. I think that is Irish self-deprecation. So they think one of their heroes is 7 times less powerful than a god, and one of their gods is still 7 times less powerful than a classical hero. I feel like that's just placing themselves in a very rubbish position there, and being very self-deprecating about the value of their heroic literature. People compare Irish literature to classical literature. They're like, oh yeah, the Aeneid's about the founding of Rome and dynasties and politics. The Tyne's about a cow. Well, it is about a cow, but it's also not about a cow. It's also about like the history of the landscape of Ireland, and yes, the cow is the breaking point, but those provinces have hated each other for ages. It's kind of the culmination of a lot of other stories showing them at each other's throats, and I feel like we do it an injustice when we're like, oh, it's about a cow. I feel like that text is kind of being self-deprecating in order to big up a golden classical age of the past. Maybe that's not what it's trying to do, I don't recall that claim particularly, but it's kind of saying, yeah, well, these heroes of the past were great, but that god of the past before that was even greater, and that classical past before that was even greater. Look how debased we are. I don't know, I feel like they need to give themselves more credit. Also, Conall, like, decapitates about, what, 6,000 people? Like, Conall kills a lot of people. He could take Luke. I could take Luke. I mean, I know he's good at everything, but I could take him. What is your favourite dumb Victorian theory for Irish lit? Not a theory, I just love how they thought it was a valid methodology to meditate on the gods and write down what they came up with in these trances. This is how we ended up with Aengus as a love god. Okay, actually, Aengus as a love god is my favourite Victorian theory, because it gave us great art, like the painting I like to call Camp Aengus. Why? Aengus is not a love god. If you want to know more about that, you should watch my videos on Tok Fachaden. Also, I will be talking more about Aengus in the near future, so keep an eye out for that. Finally, if you have the budget to adopt any tale or cycle to screen, which would it be and why? And what elements would you want to preserve at any cost? I honestly don't know, because Irish lit is like, it's not very visual, it's very stylized. There's a lot about it that you try and translate into a visual depiction and it just doesn't work, it doesn't make any sense. It is too fundamentally weird to be visual. I would actually be more interested in turning bits of Irish lit into dance. I feel like it is a very physical type of narrative more than it is a visual narrative, and I would find it easier, I mean, I always find it easier to choreograph things than to draw them because I don't have a visual brain, but I would love one day to choreograph Cofrachferdia, which is the bit of the time where Cuchulainn fights his brother-in-arms and best friend and possibly lover Ferdia. I would love to choreograph that as like a fusion mix of ballet, contemporary and Irish dance, kind of a bit like what Brendan de Galli does with some of his choreographic work. I feel like it would be fascinating. I basically have sections of it choreographed in my head, but I'm not a good enough dancer to translate them into anything real. So that is literally my goal with dance, is to get to the point where I could choreograph Cofrachferdia. So that's what I would do, personally. The thing I would want to remain intact is that Cuchulainn has to be small. He's small and fast and slight. He's not a big beefy dude. I would happily dance Cuchulainn. I mean, he's described as small and dark-browed. Small, sad, dark man. I can do that. I've actually played Cuchulainn before in Hamilton, which was a parody of the 10 Dual Commandments from Hamilton, but about the Táin. It was for the Asnach Yule play, and it is on YouTube, and I will put a link to it in the description. It is not very good, none of us can rap, but I make a great and very sassy Cuchulainn. And that is definitely all the questions we have time for, but I will try and do another one of these in the future, so if you want to leave me any questions, you can do it here, you can do it in my inbox on Tumblr, you can do it basically anywhere. I will see you soon for possibly the Dream of Aengus, depending on whether something else distracts me before then. Goodbye!